During medieval times, primarily in England during the reign of King Stenton, the reputation of knights was considerably at its peak. Thanks to Stenton's love for knighthood, knights were given the best wealth and leisure they could possibly have. One sport in particular that was very popular amongst all knights were knightly tournaments. It was these famous tournaments where two knights, riding on horses, would rush towards each other at full speed, lances in hand, hoping to take the opponent down. The sights were glorious, and the crowd would cheer on and on. Knight tournaments, or just the lifestyle knights would live during the time, is what would actually inspire Geoffrey of Monmouth to write the story of King Arthur and his adventures. When writing his stories, Geoffrey would picture a romanticized version of what was going on in his life. When describing the life of King Arthur, he would state that Arthur's fine armor, each piece was known by its personal name, and the feasts and sports by which Arthur's coronation was celebrated. The knights sported in imitation of a fight on horseback, with the ladies watching from the walls, encouraging the competitors. Geoffrey clearly was referring to the tournaments which at the time became a regular feature in medieval social life. At first, popes forbade tournaments as they were considered no more than a waste of time, and knights were better off fighting in an actual battlefield. Pope Alexander III even declared that those who were killed in a tournament would not get a proper Christian burial, but regardless of what the popes thought, tournaments was still a popular activity and even became an excellent way of training for actual war. This was in fact true, as this was the same time where crusading in the Holy Land took place. However, popes such as Celestine II thought that young men could easily learn the art of war more effectively if they were to actually travel to the Holy Land and crusade. It was, after all, the most glorious way a person could reach knighthood. For armor and tournaments, men would wear helmets and shields that would show off their names or whatever coat of arms they were representing in order to make them much more recognizable when they were marching onto the tournament field clad in armor. For example, in Geoffrey's writings, he described Arthur's shield as a picture of the Blessed Virgin Mary to remind him constantly of her. When a knight would die in a tournament, it would often be explained in an overly exaggerated sort of way. For example, when the knight Geoffrey de Mandeville died, it was said that he died of a wound received while, in the French manner, riding horses very quickly as he attacked his opponent with lances and spears. Although most tournaments were indeed lethal, there were some that were used for the mere training or entertainment. The earliest forms of tournaments were actually mock battles, such as the joust, which used training lances to attempt to knock one opponent off their horse. The Statum Armorum or Statute of Arms even enacted that any sharp weapons were forbidden from tournaments such as these. The people who would usually engage in these tournaments were often young men who had nothing to do and landless knights who made war their profession. Again, this was during the time when the Crusades were occurring. However, men who became knights fought in the Crusades either for religious reasons or for the glory of God, such as the Knights Templar. However, there were still young men and boys who wanted to become knights and fight in wars in order to make something of themselves, perhaps even to prove to their family and friends that they were chivalrous. Overall, there was no better training for war than a mimic battle which tournaments were mostly used for. The young knights still had to understand that tournaments were still dangerous and no rules could control the excitement. For example, one of Henry II's sons, Geoffrey, husband of the heiress of Brittany, was killed in a tournament in France when he was thrown and trampled on by his horse. One interesting fact about medieval tournaments was that if two countries were at peace, for example England and France, then people were free to attend with the feeling of excitement or entertainment, but if a war were to happen, then the fictional excitement would be omitted and those fighting were to prove themselves to their country rather than impress the ladies. Despite the dangers of tournaments, there was no doubt that men who were most drawn to the sport were former servants or landless knights who aspired to win in hopes to gain some land as the reward. Today, knightly tournaments are still relevant when studying about medieval life. Renaissance fairs, for example, have mimicked jousting tournaments where family and friends can witness the glory of two knights clashing together in an epic duel. Even in pop culture, tournaments are referenced, such as in Season 1 of Game of Thrones and The Last Duel, which was directed by Ridley Scott, the same person who made my favorite medieval film, Kingdom of Heaven. Overall, knightly tournaments are still one of the most iconic sports in medieval history. Thank you for watching this video and supporting my love for history, and I'll see you on the next one.